Wyoming Territory, July 1882. The sun was just beginning its slow slide toward the mountains when Eliza Harlow's life ended in one world and began in another. She stood barefoot on the dusty road outside her family's ranch house, a small carpetbag in her hand and her father's final words still ringing in her ears. "You made your choice. Now live with it. You are no daughter of mine." Her mother had not spoken a word, only turned away. Eliza did not cry. Not while the door slammed shut behind her. Not while she walked past the corral where the horses turned their heads but did not come near, and not even now as the wind picked up, brushing wild strands of hair across her face like the touch of someone she used to know. She had nowhere to go. The Harlows were respected in the valley, proud cattle folk who did not take kindly to shame. Eliza's shame? Falling pregnant by a man who had promised her a wedding, then vanished before spring thawed the snow. The baby had been born still and buried beneath a cottonwood tree 3 weeks ago. Her father waited until she could stand before casting her out. Everything hurt. She kept walking. The bag was light, just a few dresses, a photo of her sister who had died when they were children, and a Bible with her name in her mother's handwriting. There was no plan in her head. Just the need to be away from that place. By the time the sun dipped low enough to stain the land in gold, she had walked more than 5 miles. Her legs trembled. She sat down on a flat rock near a bend in the road, head in her hands, trying to find any reason to keep going. That was when she heard the horse. It was not the sound of galloping, but the steady, slow approach of hooves on dirt. She looked up, blinking against the orange light, and saw him. He came around the bend on a tall chestnut horse, a lean figure in a trail-worn hat and dust-covered shirt. There was something easy about the way he rode, like he belonged to the land. His eyes found her instantly sharp and blue, cautious but kind. "You all right, miss?" he asked, pulling his horse to a stop. Eliza opened her mouth, then closed it. She did not know what to say. No one had asked her that in weeks. The man swung down from the saddle, boots crunching against the dry gravel. He stayed a few paces back, giving her space. "I am not here to bother you," he said gently. "Just saw you sittin' out here alone. Name's Boone Zeller. I ranch over near Crow's Hill." "Eliza," she said softly. "Harlow." His brow twitched. "From the Harlow place east of here?" She nodded once. He looked at her again, slower this time, like he was piecing something together. "You walked all the way from there?" "I had to." Boone glanced at her bag, then back to her face. "You hungry?" She nodded again. "I have coffee and bread in my saddlebag." "Not much, but it is warm," he said, already moving to unstrap things from the side of his horse. She watched him, wary but too tired to protest. He handed her a small wrapped bundle and a tin cup. She took them, her fingers brushing his. They were calloused and warm. Boone sat down nearby, cross-legged, not too close. Eliza ate like she had not in days. Boone said nothing while she did, just sipped from his canteen and watched the sky turn pink. When she finished, she looked at him. "Why are you being kind to me?" He met her eyes. "Because it costs me nothing and you look like you need it." Her throat tightened. Boone stood and walked to his horse, then paused. "Sun will be down soon. I will be riding back to my place. It ain't far. There is a spare cot in the barn and water to wash up. You are welcome to it for the night." "Nos trins punto." Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. "Are you sure?" "I am. And if you say no, I will ride on and let you be. But I would not feel right leaving you out here alone." She looked at the road behind her. Dust hung in the air like smoke. There was nothing for her that way. Nothing at all. Eliza stood, brushing off her dress. "All right." Boone offered his hand. She hesitated, then reached out. Her hand slid into his, and something shifted inside her chest, something small and cautious, but real. Boone helped her up onto the horse, then climbed up behind her, careful not to crowd her. The ride was quiet. The wind picked up again, brushing against her face as the last of the sun melted behind the hills. By the time they reached Boone's ranch, dusk had fallen fully. The land was quiet, peaceful. His home was simple, a cabin beside a low barn, a corral with 2 horses grazing. He helped her down, then led her inside. The cabin smelled like cedar and coffee. There was a fire in the hearth and a soft patchwork quilt folded on the bench. "You can sleep in here if you would rather," Boone offered, setting down her bag. "But the barn is cooler if you prefer that." "This is fine," Eliza said, her voice low. He nodded. "I will be out in the barn if you need anything. Just knock." Eliza watched him go. She stood in the center of the small room, the firelight flickering across the walls. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. She sat on the cot, pulled the quilt over her lap, and let her shoulders drop. Outside, Boone leaned against the barn door, looking up at the stars. He had not expected to find anyone on the road today, but he could not get her eyes out of his mind. How tired they were, but how strong. He knew better than to get involved with someone carrying that much hurt, but something about her pulled at him, quiet, steady. Back inside, Eliza stared at the fire. Her hand still felt warm from where he had touched it. She did not know where this would go. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to find out. Eliza woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the faint creak of leather straps outside the cabin. Morning light filtered through the chinks in the shutters, soft and gray-blue, not yet bright. Her feet touched the floor before she realized she'd slept through the night without waking once. A kettle clinked against iron just beyond the wall. She stepped out onto the porch barefoot, arms wrapped around herself against the chill. Boone was near the well, bracing his shoulder against the pump handle. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, exposing sun-darkened skin and old scars that disappeared beneath the fabric. His horse was tethered nearby, already saddled. "Water's cold this morning," he said without turning. "Didn't think you'd be up yet." "It's quieter here than I'm used to," Eliza said. Boone glanced over. "You sleep any?" She nodded. "Enough." He finished filling the bucket and carried it toward her, setting it down on the porch edge. "There's bread and lard on the table. You're welcome to it." She stepped aside to let him pass, watching the way he moved, deliberate, like each motion had a purpose. He didn't speak again until he was inside, setting mugs on the table. "I've got fence to mend up near the creek. Won't be back until sundown." He handed her one of the mugs, steam curling from its rim. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, but if you'd rather move on, I can get you to the post road by tomorrow." Eliza took the mug. "I don't have anywhere to be." Boone gave a single nod. "Then you're welcome here." She sat at the table, fingers wrapped around the tin. "I could help. With the fence." "I won't say no to help," he said. "But I've only one saddle horse, and the ride's rough. Not good for someone still healing." "I'm not porcelain." Boone looked at her then, really looked, and something softened in his eyes. "Didn't say you were." Eliza didn't respond. She took a sip of the coffee instead. It was bitter and strong, and it settled something in her chest. Later, after Boone had ridden off, she found a bucket and washed her face at the pump. The barn was quiet, save for the occasional shuffle of hooves. She spotted a broom leaning against the wall and began sweeping the cabin floor. It gave her a rhythm, something to do with her hands. Dust rose in small clouds, catching the light. She found a basket of apples near the hearth, some bruised, others still firm. She sorted them, set aside the soft ones for the horses, and peeled 2 to bake. There was flour on the shelf, and lard, and a clean tin. Boone had left a small fire banked in the stove. She fed it slowly, careful not to waste kindling. By the time the sun dipped low on the horizon, the scent of baked apples and cinnamon drifted through the open window. Eliza was setting the tin on the table when she heard hoofbeats returning. She didn't move to the door. She waited. Boone stepped inside, hat in hand, shirt clinging to his back from heat and work. He paused when he caught the smell. "I wasn't sure if you'd be back before dark," she said, not looking up. He set his hat on the shelf. "Had to finish the west line. Wind took part of it down last week." Eliza kept her eyes on the pie. "I hope you eat apples." Boone stepped forward, dust rising from his boots. "Only if they're baked with cinnamon and come with a quiet evening." She looked up, her mouth twitching, not a smile. Not quite, but something close. "Then you're in luck," she said. He sat across from her, reaching for the knife. "You ever do ranch work?" "I helped with calving every spring. Branded steers. Gathered strays after storms. My father thought keeping busy kept a girl from thinking too much." Boone sliced into the pie. "Did it?" "No," she said. "Not really." The evening stretched quiet between them as they ate. Outside, crickets had begun their slow chorus, and the light through the window had turned pale lavender. Boone leaned back in his chair. "There's a town south of here. 2 days' ride. They've got a boarding house and a dry goods store. If you ever wanted to earn coin, the storekeeper's always needing hands." Eliza folded her hands in her lap. "I don't want to go to town." He met her gaze evenly. "Then you don't have to." She stood and carried the plates to the basin, not hurrying. Behind her, Boone rose and stepped out onto the porch. She followed him. The stars were coming out one by one. The air smelled of dust and cedar. Boone rubbed the back of his neck. "You're not what I expected." "I get that a lot." He looked over, his expression unreadable. "You've got grit. Some folks lose everything and turn to ash. Others just bend, like cottonwood in a storm." "I've done both," she said. Boone was silent for a long moment. "I ain't a man who talks much, but I listen. If you ever need that." She leaned against the post, eyes on the stars. "What if I don't know what I need yet? Then I'll be here anyway." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away from him either. In the quiet, something passed between them, not spoken, not rushed, just present. A space neither had known they needed until now. And when Eliza finally turned to go inside, she left the door open behind her. The next morning, Boone left a coiled rope and a pair of worn gloves on the porch bench without a word. Eliza noticed them when she stepped out to shake the dust from her dress. She slid the gloves on, the leather stiff but clean, and followed the sound of hammering near the paddock. Boone was crouched beside a gate, repairing a hinge with steady strikes. He glanced up as she approached, then returned to his work without greeting. She knelt beside him and held the wood steady until the last nail was driven clean. When he stood, she did too, brushing her hands on her skirt. "You ever work with sheep?" he asked. "No, sir." "Then today's a learning day." They walked behind the barn to a small chute pen, where half a dozen ewes waited to be sheared. Boone handed her a dull blade and showed her how to hold the wool steady while slicing close, without nicking skin. She was clumsy at first, but careful, and by midday her hands moved with purpose. Boone wiped his brow with his sleeve. "You take to things quick." "I had to," she said, not looking up. His eyes lingered on her, but he said nothing more. After the last ewe was freed, they carried the fleece to the shed. Inside, dust swirled in shafts of light as they spread the wool to dry. Eliza's arms were sore, but she didn't mind. Her body ached in a way that felt earned. Boone leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You could stay on if you wanted. There's more work than I can finish come summer." She didn't answer at first. She smoothed a corner of the fleece with her palm, watching the fibers settle. "You don't know me." He nodded once. "I know enough." Eliza turned to face him. "What do you think you know?" "That you don't scare easy. That you work without being asked. And that you've been let down. More than once." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You offering charity or a place?" "I'm offering what's mine to offer." She studied him, her face unreadable. Then I'll stay. Boone didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased. He stepped outside without another word, and Eliza followed. That evening, she washed in the spring-fed basin behind the barn. The water was sharp on her skin. She scrubbed until the itch of wool left her arms, and her scalp felt clean. She changed into a dry dress and braided her hair loosely, the ends still damp. When she came in, Boone was at the table, mending a saddle strap by lantern light. He looked up once, then returned to his stitching. She sat across from him, folding her hands. Do you live alone by choice? I had a brother once. He lit out for Oregon after the war and never looked back. Folks I grew up with scattered. I stayed. Why? Land doesn't lie to you. People do. She traced the edge of the table with her finger. You think I'm lying? No. Then why do you trust me? He set the strap down and looked at her fully. Because it's been 2 days and you haven't asked for anything you didn't earn. Eliza's throat tightened. She looked away, toward the hearth. I used to believe people could be good without being tested. And now, I think some still are. Just not the ones I trusted first. Boone leaned back in his chair. You want to stay, you stay. But I won't ask questions you're not ready to answer. I'm not hiding, she said, her voice steady. I just don't want to be that girl anymore. The one people whisper about. Boone stood and crossed to the stove, lifting the kettle and pouring hot water into 2 cups. He set one in front of her. There's no one out here to whisper, he said. She wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth spread through her fingers. Then maybe this is the first place I've felt quiet in a long time. He sat again and picked up his leatherwork. Quiet's not the same as lonely. No, she said. But it's better than pretending. The room held their silence like something sacred. The lantern hissed softly, and the fire in the hearth gave off a low, steady glow. Outside, the horses shifted in the corral, hooves muffled by dirt. When Boone finally looked up, his eyes met hers without hesitation. You planning to leave once you're ready? I don't know yet. All right. She nodded slowly. But if I do stay, I won't be a guest. You're not. That night, Boone took his blanket and bedroll into the barn without a word. Eliza lay awake inside, watching the fire die. She didn't know when the ache in her chest had begun to ease, but it had. And she didn't feel alone anymore. By the end of July, the wind changed. It came down from the mountains in slow gusts that smelled faintly of pine and dry sage. The days grew hotter, but the nights cooled sooner, and the cattle gathered under the cottonwoods more often, huddled in the shade like old men at a card table. Eliza had taken to rising before the sun to gather eggs and bring in the milk pail from the goat pen. Boone never asked it of her, he only noticed, quietly, by the way the morning work was already done when he came in from checking the west pasture. One morning, Boone returned with a new split across his knuckles and a scrap of dried blood near his temple. What happened? Eliza asked, wiping her hands on her skirt. Bull went through the fence line. Got him turned back, but he didn't like the idea. She stepped closer. Let me see. I've had worse. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be cleaned. She brought out the tin of carbolic salve and gently rubbed it across the scrape. Boone didn't flinch, though his jaw flexed once under her touch. You ever think about hiring a hand? She asked. Used to have one. Took off last fall, chased a girl to Missouri. He paused. Didn't work out. And you didn't look for another? Hard to find someone I trust not to drink through my wages or mouth off to the animals. Eliza's fingers stilled. I'm not going anywhere. He looked down at her hand curled around the tin. Didn't say you were. The next day, they rode out together to check the northern boundary, where the terrain turned rockier and the grass came up in thin, stubborn patches. Boone offered her the mare with a gentle gait and packed a saddlebag with jerky and cornmeal biscuits. They rode in easy silence, the kind that didn't ask for filling. At the rise above the dry gulch, Boone dismounted and pointed out a strip of rust along the wire. "Lightning strike," he said. "Comes down fast this time of year." Eliza crouched beside the post. "You got more wire?" "In the pack." They worked side by side, Boone holding the line taut while Eliza wrapped and nailed. Her hair stuck to her temples, and her arms ached from hammering, but she didn't stop. When it was done, they sat under the sparse shade of a juniper, splitting the last biscuit between them. Boone took a slow bite, chewing thoughtfully. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming? I used to dream about Chicago when I was little. Big houses, orchestras, women in silk gloves." She laughed quietly. "I don't anymore." "What changed?" "I grew into my hands." She looked down at her fingers, callous now, clean but rough. "They don't belong in silk." Boone leaned back on his elbows. "Mine never did either." A hawk cut across the sky above them, wings wide, casting a brief shadow over the ground. Neither of them spoke for a while. By the time they rode back, the last of the light stretched long across the valley. Boone unsaddled the horses while Eliza washed up, then they met again inside, drawn there by habit more than plan. She ladled stew into bowls from the pot she'd left simmering. He brought in a basket of green beans he'd picked along the fence row and left them by the sink. "I've been thinking," he said after the first few bites, "about building a second room." She looked up, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Not for you to feel pushed out," he added quickly. "Just figured if you're staying past summer, maybe you'd want space. Your own door. A window that faces east." She set the spoon down. "You do that?" Boone nodded. "I've got the lumber. Just haven't had a reason." Eliza folded her hands in her lap. "I'd like that. A window that catches morning." They finished the meal without more talk of it, but something had shifted. Not spoken, not pressed, but understood. Later, she stood outside while he fed the horses. The moon was only a sliver, hanging low near the horizon. When Boone came up beside her, he didn't speak right away. "I've lived here 6 years," he said finally. "Didn't feel like home, till this summer." She turned toward him, her voice low. "Was it me?" "It was you." Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. Boone reached for her hand, not sudden, not unsure. She let him take it, their fingers fitting together like they'd been waiting for this shape. "I don't need silk, Boone," she said. "I don't have any," he replied. She laughed, soft and full. The wind picked up again, brushing past them with the scent of dry grass and distant rain. Boone didn't let go, and Eliza didn't pull back. Somewhere deep in the dark, a coyote howled once, then fell quiet. And in the hush that followed, a promise simple, wordless, real settled between them like the first steady note of a song neither of them had known they'd been waiting to hear. The walls went up in August. Boone cut the boards himself, hauling them from the pile he'd stacked in the lean to behind the barn. Eliza held them steady as he drove the nails, her hands firm even when the sun pressed hard against the back of her neck. The new room grew with each day 4 walls, a narrow door, a single-pane window that looked toward the cottonwoods. Every part of it slow built, not just for shelter, but because of what it meant. She didn't say so aloud, but Boone knew. He moved differently now when she was near, less guarded, less braced for silence. He had learned the sound of her stitching in the evenings, the way she hummed under her breath when she was thinking, and the way she fell quiet when something mattered. One night after the roof was laid, they sat outside with their feet propped on the porch rail, a jar of preserved peaches between them. Boone took a bite, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You ever think about raising something more than goats and cattle?" he asked. Eliza looked over at him. "Like what?" "Chickens, maybe. Or a garden. This land could take to squash." She leaned back. "You planning to become a farmer?" He shook his head. "No. Just wondering what it would be like to share a place, not just keep it going." A breeze stirred the hair at her temple. You mean with someone? I mean with you, he said. She didn't speak right away. Then she reached over, took the jar from his hand, and set it aside. I never thought I'd want to build anything again, she said. Not after what happened. Boone turned toward her. You don't have to tell me. I want to. She folded her arms on the rail. He wasn't cruel. Just careless. Said all the words I'd waited to hear, then disappeared before the ground thawed. I waited weeks before I told my father. He didn't speak to me again, not once, not even when I was in labor. Boone's jaw twitched. You don't owe anyone shame. I know that now. But back then, all I could feel was the weight of it. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't offer to fix it. He just listened. Eliza drew in a slow breath. You're not like him. I hope not. You're steady. You don't use words unless you mean them. Boone looked down at his hands. I've never had someone choose to stay. Well, she said softly, now you do. When he reached for her then, it wasn't with urgency. It was with reverence. His palm slid over hers, his thumb brushing the curve of her knuckles. She leaned into his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against the top of her head. The next week, he took the wagon into town, came back with a new pane of glass and a bolt of calico the color of prairie flax. Eliza sewed curtains that afternoon, her needle rising and falling in rhythm with the distant hum of bees near the fence line. Boone stood in the doorway as she hung them. You made it feel like someone lives here. Someone does, she said. That night, she didn't sleep in the new room. She stayed in the cabin with him. No words passed between them when she stepped through the doorway, barefoot and quiet. He moved aside the quilt, and she lay down beside him, her back against his chest, his arms slipping around her waist like it had always belonged there. September came with gold-tipped cottonwoods and the first frost in the mornings. They canned apples and cut firewood, stacking it high along the north wall. Boone took a trip to the county seat and returned with a marriage license tucked into the front pocket of his coat. Eliza read it twice, then looked up at him. You sure? He nodded. I've never been more. They married in the clearing behind the barn, with the horses watching from the fence and the wind shaking loose the first yellow leaves. Boone wore his cleanest shirt. Eliza tied her braid with a piece of blue ribbon she found in the bottom of her trunk. The preacher from Crow's Hill made the ride out, and when he asked the question, she didn't hesitate. Ido. Boone's voice was low, but certain. Ido. They exchanged rings, simple bands he'd hammered himself, polished until they gleamed. No one else stood witness but the trees and sky. When the preacher rode off, Boone led her back toward the cabin, his hand steady at the small of her back. Inside, the fire was lit, and the stew she'd left simmering filled the room with warmth. He turned to her. You hungry? She smiled. Not yet. They didn't speak again for a long while. That night, wrapped in his arms beneath the quilt they'd stitched together, Eliza closed her eyes and felt, for the first time in her life, entirely known. Years passed. The garden grew. The chickens multiplied. Boone built a smokehouse, and Eliza planted lilacs along the fence. In spring, she taught herself to dye wool with onion skins. In winter, he carved her a rocking chair with wild roses etched into the back slats. They never left Wyoming. They didn't need to. Their life was not grand, but it was full. Full of evenings spent shelling beans by lantern light, and mornings where Boone kissed her temple before stepping into his boots. Full of laughter that came easier each year, and silence that never felt empty. Full of work and rain, and the kind of love that didn't need proving once it was spoken. And when the first child came, a girl with Boone's eyes and Eliza's quiet strength, they wrapped her in the same quilt that had warmed their first winter together. In that cabin with the east-facing window, they built something no storm could undo. A life. A home. A love born from the hard-earned hours and the quiet, steady choosing of one another every day, without fail. And it was enough. Always.